welcome to Kohler Commentary. Today I am joined by Sharon Kim, and I'm super excited for this conversation. Sharon serves as the executive director at Mustard Seed Generation, MSG, a nonprofit organization that exists to lower mental health barriers in the Korean American community. She was born in Paraguay to Korean parents and grew up in Paraguay, Spain, and China, and has worked in Korea and Mexico. Growing up as a global nomad, she experienced hardships that many third culture kids go through, namely anxiety that comes from constantly moving around, as well as a sense of rootlessness and identity crisis. Through these experiences, she became passionate about raising awareness of cross cultural kids to monocultural parents and hopes to help strengthen parent child relationships through MSG. She holds her bachelor's degree in English language and literature from Seoul National University and a master's degree in international education policy from Harvard Graduate School of Education. Oh my gosh, amazing. Sharon enjoys going anywhere and everywhere on a journey with her brown leather journal, a black pen, and a good book in hand in her spare time. I met Sharon through my volunteer time with MSG, and if y'all know me before this, you guys know I am obsessed with MSG. And while I did have to take some time to rest this term, I'm so excited to reconnect with her in this way and hopefully again through MSG in the future. I'm so excited for this time to get to know her deeper in her own story and journey that brought her here today. So, welcome, Sharon. Hello.
Hi, hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the pod. This is so crazy because we've only interacted through like virtual settings,
I
right?
know, yeah. Knowing that all our volunteers, we work all virtually, so we've never met in person, but I know we connected multiple times before, so.
Exactly. And you were in Boston at that time, and now you're in Texas or Boston,
No,
Jersey,
I was
East
in
Coast?
Pennsylvania
Oh,
at that
Pennsylvania.
time, and then now
Okay.
I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Yay! Yeah, I know. I think it's just so crazy how things happen and I'm excited because this is your first year as executive director. Was that like kind of a surprise or like
That was a surprise because we didn't see that coming. And I think us becoming an independent organization from our parent organization made us think a lot about, okay, so who's going to lead the new generation of people? And that came as a surprise.
But how have you been enjoying it so far?
It's been the most thrilling, satisfying, nerve-wracking, stressful experience, I think, so far from all that I've done. And it's been so much fun because I feel like I'm on the front seat of a roller coaster ride and I get to experience all the ups and downs and see it firsthand. So it's been really great.
So we'll talk more about MSG in general, but it just became independent within the last year, right? I think I was a volunteer
Yes.
when that kind of happened, and it was like really
Yeah.
exciting. And so I
Yes.
can only imagine the stressors that also come with an exciting new nonprofit. So I think whenever people hear me talk about MSG, they just like hear the passion. When they hear anybody talk about MSG, there's just like this, like, oh my gosh, Korean American mental health, like what? But sometimes also I hear like, wait, so what is this exactly? And how could
Yeah.
this actually help me if I have a quote mental health struggle? So in that
Yeah.
sense, like how would you describe MSG for a listener so that they can realize how this could be a great bridge for them?
Yes, sure. So mustard seed generation, the name comes from a Bible verse where, it says that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that grows into a big tree
Hmm.
and provides refuge for many. And that's exactly how we envision our work is that we are planting little seeds that will later provide a refuge and healing and reconciliation for many, many broken families. And what we do at MSG, and we call it MSG in short
Love
because
it.
we love MSG too.
A lot of funny people on your staff, apparently.
Yes. And we call it MSG. And what we do here is we raise awareness about mental health through education. So we do workshops, trainings, webinars, things like that, where we're working not, we don't provide intervention. So we are not clinicians, we don't do counseling, but what we do is we work on the preventative side of things by raising awareness and saying, look, for a community such as the Korean American community where mental health is so stigmatized, it's really hard to even talk about mental health. Mental health in Korean is actually a negative word, right? It's like being crazy, mentally crazy. But for us to be able to talk about it openly, to be able to say, hey, there's no shame, there's no
Mm.
stigma in seeking help, in talking about your issues, that is what we try to do. And we also work with parents with children, so that those intergenerational conflicts that happen between parents who are more Korean and their children who are more Americanized will have a better relationship with each other. We also provide them tools to do that. And more recently, what we now launched is we launched a new online program for church leaders. We've
Yes.
never had anything like this before, but your listeners might know that 70 to 80% of Korean Americans attend church regularly, and that's where they seek help. They don't go anywhere else, but they like to go to, their elders or their pastors to seek emotional support. And a lot of the times pastors report that they feel under-equipped to deal
Mhm.
with mental health issues like such as depression, suicidal ideation. And so what we did was we came up with a very culture specific training just for Korean American church leaders, so that they go through this 7-week training and they will be better equipped to build mentally healthy churches.
Because you guys had three different buckets, but this is becoming a main focus for this
Yes,
year. And I
yes,
think this is so important, especially like as you were even talking, when I was like a youth teacher, I've had several students really open up. And like that's such a great relationship to build. But I'm also
hmm,
remembering some like self harm sharing, and like
yes.
things that's like, oh my gosh, how do I help with this? Right. And so, like, to hear that you guys are able to give church leaders the knowledge of what can you do when you get that information and how can you actually
Exactly.
allow this to not fester. It's not just and I'm not trying to say like it's not like let's just go pray to Jesus because that's absolutely
Right.
important, right? But like the actual tools as well in our society that's needed. I think that's like such an important gap that you guys are bridging.
And it makes a lot of sense when we think about physical health. So if somebody has a broken limb, we at church, we do say we'll pray for you, but then we
Mhm.
also direct them to,
Right.
if they don't want to go to the correct to so that they can seek appropriate help. So we take them to the ER, we take them to the doctor, but we don't do that with mental health, which should
Yeah.
happen. And so if somebody like a youth student comes up to me and shares their self-harm actions, then how do I respond appropriately
Right.
so that I'm not just saying, hey, let's pray? That's also important. But also after that, how can I take them to an appropriate place to so that they can seek help?
Right. Oh, that's really good. Wait, so is the program still accepting registrations right now?
Yes, yes, it is.
Plug it in.
So if you are a Korean American church leader, any
Mhm.
leader, right? If you're a Sunday school teacher, youth leader, whatever it is, and you'd like to know more about how to be better equipped in handling mental health issues with your youth students, with your congregation, whoever it might be, you can learn at learn.mustardseedgeneration.org. And if you
Okay.
go there, it'll lead you straight into the registration page.
Okay, and I will link that because I think that's so vital.
Yes.
Like, that's such a vital tool for us. So, thanks for
Yes.
sharing that on the
Yeah,
front
of
end.
course.
MSG also, even though they don't provide clinical services themselves, you're like the messenger in between. You can act as that if people are
Yes.
interested in finding someone that
Right.
is of culturally competent care or whatnot, like someone
Yes.
that is equipped to kind of hear the struggles we do go through that maybe we feel like might not be understood
Right.
in a different setting. And even I found my current therapist through the MSG,
Directory?
yeah, directory, through
Yeah,
all of
yes.
that.
Oh, that's
So I'm literally
awesome.
saying like it's a great bridge, even if they themselves might not be the service, right? Like they can connect you to that person that really
Yes.
could be the perfect fit.
We really see ourselves as bridge builders. So
Hmm.
that's one of our core characteristics. And
Oh, that's a good word.
yeah, and what we do is we help people connect to the right, as you said, culturally appropriate help. And that includes Korean American therapists. And a lot of the times, our Korean speaking older generation parents are a little bit afraid of going to for instance, a white therapist because of language barriers, right? And so what we do is on our website, we provide an online directory with all these Korean American therapists listed out by state. And if you go to your state, you can seek help. And a lot of them also do telehealth. And so if you're concerned about that as well, all the distance and all that, you could also seek telehealth. But you could also reach out to us so
Hmm.
that we can connect you with, if you have a special condition or something that you're looking for, you can reach out to us as well and email us. And then we'll get back to you with, hey, these are our recommendations for who you should reach out to.
Yes, so these are all just like resources I feel like we didn't have. So as we learn
Yeah.
more, it's just an amazing door to open if you are interested in
Hmm.
furthering that. Sharon, how did you get involved with MSG yourself? I'm hearing a lot of education in the foundation of all of Mustard Seed Generation,
Mm,
and so I know it was through Harvard with the
yeah.
School of Education, but if you wanted to share kind of further your journey into MSG itself.
So when I was in Harvard, Kathy Kang, who was our previous CEO, she asked a bunch of Korean American students, hey, would you like to help out at a conference? And I was like, sure, yes. And the conference was Asian American mental health and raising awareness about that to parents and students. And I led a workshop that was on understanding your bicultural child to parents. So I spoke to parents about, hey, you're monocultural, our children are bicultural. How do you understand them better? And that comes from my personal journey of having monocultural parents who really didn't understand what I was going through as I was moving through different continents. They didn't really provide the appropriate support that I would have wanted them to. And now I realize is because they just didn't have the knowledge or the tools to do that.
Hmm.
And so that's what I wanted to do is bridge that gap. And so I did that workshop and I did one. It was so funny because I did one for just any Asian American parent for the first workshop. And the second time I just did it for Korean parents in Korean.
Wow.
And it was so funny because, the first workshop was very lively, lots of discussions going back and forth. And the second workshop, it was dead quiet and people were just taking notes. And then I was like, okay, so any discussion? And they're like, no, we're good here. Just tell us the answers and in Korean. And I was like, oh man, this is the cultural difference that we have. But after that workshop, a mother came up to me and said, I know we did case study on like this girl who wasn't eating, was showing depressive symptoms, even though I didn't state it that way. And that mom was like, that's my kid right now. That's my daughter. What do I
Mm.
do? And she came to me with such desperation. And I felt so helpless. I was like, this isn't something that I can do. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. I'm so sorry, but you'll have to go to them. But that just stuck with me. And it was a heavy weight in my mind. And then I went to Kathy and I went to some of our other friends and we started talking about what we noticed through our workshops because everyone else led workshops. And we all noticed that in the Korean American community, there was a sense of, I want to know more. I want to
Mm.
learn more. Give me more information because this is what we are going through right now. And we just felt a sense of responsibility. Like, what do we do about this? Should we create a nonprofit? And that's when we went to Dr. Josephine Kim, who was directing all of this conference. And we asked her, and she said, oh, you know what? I actually have a nonprofit that I started back in 2007. Do you want to restart that? And we were like, yes. I don't know what we were thinking when we said yes, but we were just like, yes, sure, of course. That'd be great. And we did that. And that's how we started Mr. C Generation. We restarted it in 2017.
Yeah, I always wondered what the it was founded in like earlier 2000s and then the refounding of it. And so it was a group of you guys that brought it together. And how were like those early stages of even making it as established as it is today?
It's not established today. I still have a long way to go. That's how I feel. But yes, compared to what it was like, I mean, after we said yes to Dr. Josephine Kim, what we did was we just came together and we just prayed every week.
Mm.
Prayed, prayed, prayed. And I can't emphasize that enough. I know some of your listeners might not identify as Christians or
Mhm.
religious, but for us, because we were all Christians, we felt the sense of this is so much greater than us and we can't
Mm.
solve this and we don't know what to do. So please help us. And so we always prayed. And that led to weekly meetings where we just literally we did everything. We just got out our Google Drive and we all got our emails together. We started thinking about, okay, what does it mean to set up a nonprofit? It was literally a startup phase. I remember looking up bylaws, nonprofit bylaws template,
Yeah.
and then copying that and then applying that and kind of modifying it to our own nonprofit and then feeling so proud and accomplished to have written a bylaw. You
Yeah.
never do that anywhere else. And I'm like, yes, I got to write a bylaw because this was such a startup that we had to do everything ourselves. And so figuring that out and then figuring out, okay, what is our next step? And our next step was hosting a conference, a family conference in Dallas where Kathy was located and she had good relationships with other churches that we hosted that. So we were all like putting our energy into hosting that first conference, which went really well and it was so great.
And then it's like not established yet, but kind of established today. So, I mean, at least to a point where people are able to use y'all's resources, use your
Yes.
teachings, and really
Hmm.
bring true change in their own lives. So I think
Hmm.
that, and some of your staff, even, I feel like have just been like transformed through
Yeah.
Mustard Seed. So it's just
Yeah.
amazing to see that testimony through this organization. So I'm excited. But we're not just here just for Mustard Seed, right? I want to know more about you too, because you've definitely set a standard in just sharing at our meetings when I was a volunteer and learning just a lot about you have a unique upbringing. And even as I shared your bio, you've been all over the world. You've had so many experiences. And while that's awesome, and if someone were to hear where you've lived, they're like, wow, that sounds so cool. I can only imagine that can also bring a lot of who am I, right? And a lot of just identity crisis like you had mentioned. And so if it's not too much, I'd kind of like to hear about that journey itself and what were some of those third culture kid experiences that a lot of us don't relate to because we probably even just have an identity crisis as Korean Americans itself,
Yeah.
right? But you
Yeah.
have additional layers that I would love to hear more about.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of. I married a Korean American, best husband in the whole wide world.
Oh,
But yeah, he and I relate on a lot of things, even though he never left the US. He just moved around inside the United States. We relate a lot because of the cross cultural differences that we experience, discrimination, or things like that. I think there is definitely similarities between Korean Americans and third culture kids. But my story is so my parents met in Paraguay. Their families had immigrated to Paraguay and they met at a hospital. They were medical professionals and they got married. They had us. And funny thing is that my two siblings and I, we really grew up thinking that we were Paraguayans. I really didn't see myself any different.
yeah.
I may have noticed that I looked a little bit different, but that was nothing. I remember being near a bus stop and this older gentleman, I was very young at that time, he kind of turned around and he said, "Wow, you have perfect Spanish." And for him, that was, he was
Ah,
complimenting on my Spanish as an Asian kid who spoke Spanish perfectly. And I turned around to him and said in my most educated voice, I said, "Sir, isn't it obvious that a Paraguayan should speak Spanish perfectly?" Like, for me, that was out of the question that he was saying that. I didn't understand why
yeah.
he was saying that because at that point, up until that point, I really believed I was fully Paraguayan. And it was only when I turned 13 in sixth grade when my parents said, "Oh, we're going to China." And it was a bomb that was dropped. They were called to become medical missionaries to China.
Oh.
And for me, I had no idea what that meant. And I said, "I don't want to move there. Where's China?" And they said, "It's next to Korea, silly." And I had never been to Korea, but I don't know
Mm.
how they expected me to know that. And they said, "That's where you're from." And I was like, "What? I'm from where?" And that's when I moved to China and we landed and I walked out is when I saw all these black-haired people who looked like me. And I was like, "Whoa, okay, so like I guess I am Asian." That was the first time I actually came across my race and
Wow.
ethnicity. But that was so I moved from Spain, Paraguay, China, and grew up. Secondary school was mostly in China, and then went to school in Korea for undergrad. And that upbringing, I think, as I mentioned in my bio, it is great. There are a lot of positives. I did think a lot about, do I want to raise my children the same way by letting them experience cross cultural living, international living? And I do want them to experience that because there's so much that comes with it, such as being culturally competent, knowing how to talk to anyone without any judgment, being able to work in not just black and white situations, but also in very gray situations, being okay with ambiguity, with change, constant goodbyes, constant hellos, right?
Mm.
And for me, right now, I think now that I look back, I also see that there were a lot of consequences to unaddressed trauma. Not knowing what was happening, not having a sense of control of my life, being thrust into places that I didn't want to be in, and not having communicated that with my parents and
Mm.
having them sit down with me and just say, "Hey, this is what we're doing next." Nope, it was a very traditional Korean family way of saying, "We are doing this, no questions asked, you're going to follow what I say."
Mm.
And so I think there were a lot of difficulties that come with that.
So you're a third culture kid and you're a missionary kid.
Yes, yes.
I feel like those are like people usually have like one of these. I didn't. Oh my goodness. Another positive is I'm like always wowed when you lead conferences and you translate in Korean, or I guess you can also translate in Spanish. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. She's so cool. But right, like you mentioned, right, the unaddressed trauma is so key in a lot of our struggles that we feel that we've never been able to explore that. And so one, with that, if we were to go deeper, like was that a struggle in the sense of like what are some of your own mental health journeys that you might have been on, and when maybe did you also feel like you were able to find closure in this trauma that you feel like was not
Mm.
addressed at the beginning?
Yeah, so my mental health journey, what we say in Mustard Seed Generation, everyone has mental health and some people have mental illness. So mental illness doesn't equate to mental health. And for me, my mental illness, when
Mm,
I realized that it was very severe, that's when I realized I had something called mental health. And even then I don't think I had all the language and tools like I do now. So MSG has been a blessing for me personally as well too. But it was specifically in high school where I was going through a lot. I couldn't deal with normal situations. And it was interesting because on the outside, I was a perfect A student. Like
mm,
I was excelling in all these different things. And yet internally, I was going through depression, anxiety,
mm,
suicidal ideation. In senior year, my suicidal ideation got so bad that
mm,
I really did. It slipped. And I say it slipped accidentally because I didn't mean to say it. I didn't want to have to deal with the consequences of sharing it with somebody else.
mm,
But my social studies teacher, when she heard that, she got very alarmed and she got a counselor for me. And when we heard that, but it was interesting because when I didn't want to deal with the consequences, it was specifically the way that my parents would react. And when I got back home after, the school was like, we need to tell your parents, we need to, let them know. And I was like, no, because
mm,
when I got home, my mom was furious. And that was her reaction was she was like, why on earth would you want to kill yourself? There's no
mm,
reason for you to be, for me, I was being ungrateful. And I remember kind of yelling back at her and saying, this is exactly why I don't share things with you. And I just went in and closed the door. And then later she came back and then she was crying. And I realized that she had been crying in the kitchen. And she came back and she kind of laid down next to me and said, if I lose you, I don't have anything else. And at that moment, I was like, in my mind, even in my young mind, I was like, Mom, you need to get a life. I'm sorry. Like, I can't be your
yeah,
everything. I shouldn't. That's just so unhealthy. I don't know who taught me that. Nobody taught me that. But I remember thinking, like, I can't keep living up to your expectations.
yeah.
And my parents had been, up until that point, very, very strict. And they expected perfection or excellency. It was either or, but nothing less. And if I made a mistake, such as like a 98 on my test, that would mean like huge trouble. And so for them, excellency, like it just meant that we needed to be model citizens, live or like perfect lives for others. And they had very high expectations of me. And that led to severe anxiety, severe, stress about succeeding and achieving academically. But I think that was the very lowest point in my life. And
Mm,
with that, also during that time, what my parents didn't know is that I was being sexually abused for a long time by my
mm,
partner, by my boyfriend at that moment, at that time. And
mm,
so that, with emotional abuse, verbal
yeah.
abuse, that all that comes with it, it was just for me really hard to think that for me in my mind was, if there's a hell, which I believe there was, it couldn't be worse than my present. And
Mm,
so I wanted to end it right there. And that's why I kind of, sorry, I'm so sorry for your listeners if this is a little bit triggering. I apologize. And, if you want to take a moment to pause and recalibrate, that's totally okay.
mm,
For me, the reason I didn't decide to end my life was just the thought of that there might be a God. And if there is a God, then there's going to be judgment and punishment, or, like I won't be able to be redeemed, I guess, in a sense. And for me, that was the only last thread that kept me going and waking up every day. But I think slowly as I went and transitioned, graduated, broke up, graduated, moved away from my past situation, and then moved to a new environment. It came with a new set of challenges where
mm,
I was dropped in a country that I was supposed to call my own, and I had reverse culture shock. I looked Korean. Up until that point, I had been a foreigner. And anywhere I went, I knew I was a foreigner, oh, except in Paraguay, but I knew I was a foreigner. I knew I was different. But in Korea, I looked Korean. People expected me to act Korean, but I didn't. And I thought very differently. And that was such a reverse culture shock that came with its own set of challenges. And I think it was really a lot of support from my church community, a lot of support from my friends, and seeking help. Even at that moment, I didn't see a therapist or counselor, but doing a lot of internal reflection has helped me. And even now, I still live with depression. I still live with, and your second question was, how did that journey end, or what does that look like, things, that trauma that were unaddressed. And for me, I still am always thinking about, who am I? Do I
Mhm.
belong? Or what am I doing here on this earth? And all these different questions still come to me. I think it's, and I can't say I found an answer of
Yeah.
where is my home, who am I, but I feel like the more I'm aware of my triggers, the more I'm aware of when I feel sad, when I need to take care of myself, the better I'm equipped to deal with my health, with my mental health help. And I'm able to also love others better, like especially my husband, for instance, right? Who is always there for me, but I may not be able to take care of because of my mental health itself is not there yet. So I think it's ongoing, and I have a feeling it's going to be a lifelong process of, being comfortable with myself, knowing who I am, being okay with that. It also really helped to meet others who were from the same background as me, so other TCKs, and learning that that was a thing, learning that being culturally homeless was a thing. And yeah, I found a lot of comfort in others who were walking in similar, paths as me.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No,
Sorry.
don't say sorry. I'm one really grateful that you chose to just open up about things that you did go through, and even just thinking about like youth, Sharon, and yeah, like I think a lot of youth kids, or in general in that generation, we do have these thoughts or have these struggles, and then not knowing where to turn for that and for the things you had to go through. So I just, my heart is for you, and also I'm really glad to hear even those like small slivers that did keep you going, and that we're here today talking about it. So really
Mm,
grateful. Yeah, I think one thing I did also appreciate you sharing was that your depression isn't over, and I think like,
mhm,
even for me, like a year ago is when I realized I am depressed, and that's okay to say those words or say those
mm,
feelings. But
mhm,
right, like when you start to feel certain things, you're like, oh, okay, like if I see a therapist, then I'll be done with it. Or I don't know, like there's an
mhm,
end to
mhm.
this. And
Yeah,
I think it's helpful to realize like it could feel discouraging, but it's also just the reality of, that journey might never end. But it's what
yeah,
you said, like finding those triggers and being aware of and being able to communicate that with the community is
yeah.
even a more powerful way of combating this with those around you. So that's really a helpful tip. Ah, thank you for sharing, Sharon.
No, yeah.
So you're here now. So you came to America for grad school. That's when you came to
Yes,
America.
right,
Okay.
right. So only 6, 7 years ago, I would say 6 years ago.
That's crazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So do you feel like you were pressured in a sense to find a cultural identity in the realm of when that cultural homelessness is a thing, right? But
Hmm.
like as you are even in this space of MSG who's focusing on Korean Americans or like these words, but I'm like, but your whole upbringing is like not here, which is amazing and
Right.
brings so much experience and wisdom. Like, how does that all marry together? And it doesn't have to, but
It doesn't.
yeah.
I'm still questioning about that. Like, God, why me? Like,
So cool, yeah, that you're leading all of this at the top, and it's just like, wow.
yeah, like I think when we started MSG, that was my biggest thing. The reason I was working on MSG was because I love the people I was working
Mm,
with. I love that community, and I also loved working in a startup environment. It was not necessarily because I felt like I could identify with Korean Americanness and like I had this inside of me. And so for me, it was always like I felt like an outsider always all the time. And I definitely knew that I wasn't, the typical Korean American, first generation or second generation immigrant. And when I transitioned into the ED role, that was my biggest question was, I feel like I'm the least qualified by all
Mm.
definitions. I'm not a mental health professional. I do not have a mental health background. I am not a Korean American. I didn't even grow up here. Like, what do I know about how to lead an organization that is very niche, that
Mhm.
deals with Korean American mental health? That insecurity, I mean, I feel like is with everyone, but for me, it was that kind of insecurity that still plays a role now, where I am led to really depend on God. I remember like when I got my job description, I was like, I laid it out on the floor and I was like, God, I can't do this. I don't know how to do, I don't any of these things. Like, I don't know how to do this. You're going to have to do it. And
Mm.
I knew up until even before I became an ED while working on MSG, there were so many astounding supernatural things that had happened that I knew it wasn't our doing. So I knew that God was in control. I knew He was going to take care of it. So it felt easier. It felt like He trained me to be like, okay, when I transitioned into the ED role, I was like, okay, this is you continuing to do your work and
Mm.
me continuing to depend on you. But yeah, that is still what I struggle with.
Yeah.
Hope I do get a lot of help from my Korean American
Yeah.
husband, but and there are a lot of things that overlap that I understand, but I also don't want to assume that I know everything
Yeah.
either.
It's kind of crazy because even when you're sharing in Paraguay about the man who was like, wow, your Spanish is perfect, right? Like, it's just like you changed
Yes,
English to Spanish. But I was like,
exactly.
wow, that's so interesting. Like, for some reason, I wouldn't expect that to happen in like another country, but it's like, that makes so much sense, right? And then like, we're just like, well, we're born here. Why shouldn't we know, right? So it's like, yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like sharing that experience in a different way, but in a shared way as well. So
Yeah.
that was kind of cool to hear and puts things in perspective. So then as you're here and as you do kind of transition into some of the words that describe MSG and your own leadership, I am curious, like, what are some things you have noticed or insights, right, as you educate yourself even more and even in this conversation, like, bring in subtle ways of like what is the correct terms or what are the ways to remind us of what mental health and all of that, right? Because we're still all learning like how to appropriately define and address all of this. What are some trends you have found about the Korean community in relation to mental health? You don't have to like name all of them because we can also point our listeners to your podcast, but just like a few.
Sure. I always tell my non-Korean friends is the Korean American community has a very unique set of challenges when it comes to mental health,
Hmm.
namely immigration trauma, being acculturated into a new country, so what our parents or the first generation might have gone through, the language barriers, discrimination, prejudice, bias that they experienced and didn't have anyone to go to, and always being seen as a perpetual foreigner. Even if you're born here, you are seen as a perpetual foreigner. That, all those things, and not only that, but within the family, there are intergenerational conflicts that happen because of the what I mentioned before. You have a more Koreanized parent and a more Americanized child trying to deal with life together, but just being in conflict constantly because of their different cultural backgrounds and upbringings. And so these are just some of the many challenges that Korean Americans and may I say, like other immigrant
Hmm.
communities also have to go through. And that all has an effect on your mental health and your well being. And if you don't address that, if you don't have a language around that or tools to address it, an awareness, you might think that something's wrong with you when in fact it's a communal thing, something bigger that happened. People coming from Korea when they first immigrated out of Korea into the US, they were running away from a war torn country. They were coming as refugees,
Hmm.
essentially. And we know that the refugees have to deal with their own trauma, right? And that trauma gets passed down generation to generation, which is, I think, it's our current podcast episode right now.
Yes, I'm like,
And
I
so,
really love that one.
yes, I learned so much through that as well. But those are just some of the things that our Korean American friends go through. Those are the trends that we see. And yet, because mental health is so stigmatized, because talking about your problems, airing your dirty laundry, it's seen as you're bringing shame to your family. You
Hmm.
shouldn't talk about, your family
Hmm.
issues outside the family. It just really stops people from seeking appropriate help. And that's where we want to bridge that gap, is saying, no, no, it's okay. We need help, and we all need help. We need a communal therapy, a communal thing, right? Intervention, but we also need individual individual intervention as well. So all these things work together, and it's just such a challenging population as well. And one thing that I was shocked when I came to the US, I lived as a foreigner all my life, and I knew I was going to be discriminated against. I knew I had lesser rights than the nationals living in that country. But when I watched my husband, who was born and raised here, raised as more as an American than Korean, go and have to deal with discrimination or experience that, I was outraged. I was like, no, that's not right. Like, it's okay if it happens to me because I'm a foreigner, but you grew up here. This place belongs to you as much
Mm.
as anyone else. And why are we not speaking up? Why do you have to deal with this? Why do we have to be seen as, eternal foreigners who don't belong just because you don't see us on mainstream culture, right? So I think I was outraged in that sense, and I realized, wow, this war on culture, on diversity, and all these things that have been happening in the US that aren't talked about outside, or that are talked about in different ways in different cultures. But here, it just, for me, it was just such a shock that when on the outside, I thought America was this perfect
Yeah.
melting pot of cultures and beautiful
Mm.
Zootopia, right? Of different, like, I was that naive bunny in Zootopia, in the movie Zootopia, that everyone had their own dreams, everyone fit in. But no, it was actually, there are actually hierarchies and classes and ceilings that people don't really talk about, that are hard to break. And I think it is really up to us to speak up and really fight back and just say, hey, we all belong and we all want to have a say, right? So those are many of the things that our Korean American families go through.
Yeah, like you were alluding to in your well, when this airs, your podcast will be on a little break. Soon to come back up, so hyping it back. But as we're talking right now, your most recent episode with the historical, I don't know,
Trauma.
trauma, right? And it
Yeah.
was it was really interesting because like you guys were talking about how our grandparents or even great grandparents or whatever would have this like war torn trauma, and then they would bring it with them, but their kids wouldn't know why it's there, but they inherit that trauma, right? And then it comes, I
Yes.
mean, because even I am now realizing I have this trauma too. And like, I don't want to blame my parents for that trauma at all, but like,
Mm.
also, like, I need to just figure out where there is that intergenerational passing down of, not because of
Yes.
anyone's fault in that, but even just lack
Hmm.
of how to process, lack of how to even
Right.
communicate that. And then, yes, our culture of like shame and all of those things. So
Right.
just learning about those things has been really helpful to understand and not like deny in our culture, but see that
Hmm.
and say, wait, no, that's not me, or that's not something I want to carry on. So how do I
Hmm.
stop that here,
Yeah. Like you mentioned, the coping strategies that helped our grandparents or the older generation deal with all the
Mhm.
trauma that they experienced were passed down as if they were beliefs or
Yeah.
customs. And now we are just like, oh, that's what it means to be Korean. But
Yeah.
no, that's what it means to be a refugee, right? That's what it means to like have trauma.
Right.
And I think if we can talk about them, even for our next generation, since we're both like, you are a parent, I'm a parent
Yeah.
to be, I'm a parent to
Yeah.
be, thinking about, okay, what do I really want to pass down to the next generation? And thinking about what are some traumas that I experienced and the habits, lifestyle habits that came out of it.
Mm.
And do I really want to pass them down to them? Is it necessary and is it not? And how can I help them live even more satisfying lives?
Yeah, because our older generations almost didn't have that capacity to understand or even sit
Mhm.
down and think like that. And if
Right.
anything, like now that I think about it, it's like, yes, I definitely still want to like, live a good life, like financially as well, because I know
Mhm.
that's so important.
Mhm.
But also just thinking about, with this freedom that they also sacrifice to come here, like there's a freedom in mental freedom too. I don't know if that makes sense. Just
Mm.
like thinking about with that sacrifice, I can unchange or unlearn some of those ways because we have more of this like freedom to do. I
Oh
don't know. So
yeah.
that's like
Yeah.
exciting to think about. But let's point to your podcast right now. I know it's research sense, but you can share the whole title.
Yeah, so it's research sense for Korean American therapy.
Uh-huh.
And we called it sense because it was like a Korean, also Konglish word. It's like sensita,
Ah, okay.
where you have that sense of what's happening or what's
Mm,
going on around. And so research sense just means having a sense of what's happening on the Korean American mental health research side of things.
yeah.
And what we do is we break down research articles every week and we make them more accessible by just talking about it in layman's terms.
Yeah.
What is the background? What was the problem that the researchers wanted to solve or find out about? What are the results? And then what are the implications of those results? And so we just talk about different issues that we've been seeing through research articles, such as the historical trauma
Mhm.
of what Korean Americans had to go through or Koreans had to go through,
Mhm.
or intergenerational stuff, parents, or things like that. So
Yeah.
we were very surprised because Dr. Samuel Kim, who's my co-host, and I just said, when he proposed, hey, let's start this podcast, I was like, Sam, nobody's going to listen to it. Like,
No. Oh my god.
who on earth would listen to a research article being broken down in layman's terms? And we are the nerdy ones, but I'm sure there's no other nerdy one out there. And we were so surprised that we've heard people, listening to it and actually finding it helpful. So we're pleasantly surprised, but very grateful
Yeah.
for that too.
I have had people share like what would they want to hear on my podcast, and part of it is on mental health and what that means or what that looks like.
Mm.
And while
Hmm.
I can provide like stories and like, experiences,
Yeah.
I cannot provide the research or like the backings or even like things like that. And I think your podcast is just this perfect way to make it so simple, and not simple as in like
Mm.
making you like you guys are taking out content, right? Like you guys are literally
Mm.
getting an article or something and you're breaking that down and just discussing it.
Hmm.
And through those, like you had one on indebtedness, and just listening to those things, right? It's just like, yeah, that's what I struggle with too. And just like being able to hear that, right? It's all about empathy and feeling like that's not just me alone or what someone
Mm.
else alone, but hearing it in even like a research sense of it all. Like,
Yeah.
how like
Yeah.
cool is that? So also it's like usually less than 20 minutes. And I think even now that I think about it, it's a good resource to share with my parents because you guys also put little like Konglish words, and you guys are really good at pronouncing the words and stuff like that. So I think even those like Korean words are so nice for adults to hear if you want to connect with your parents or with other people, to have simple conversations. Like, oh, I listened to this podcast. What did you guys think about it? I think that's such a good conversation starter. So those resources are being available once again for people who don't know how to start, and you guys
Mm.
have that knowledge to help kind of facilitate that extra step. Props to
Thank
you.
thank you.
I guess a few more questions just on
Yeah.
when would you say is the right time to start exploring your mental health, mental illness, if so, journey? Like, I guess in a sense, like for me, right, I've had in the past year, like as you shared as well, like I did have like suicidal thoughts come into my
Mm.
mind, right? And so
Mm.
it'd be like, oh, but I'm sure everyone has these thoughts, right? And then like then
Mm.
it came to a place where it became more ideation. And then it came more like,
Mm.
oh, let's be in a room where something is there that could, things like that. And so I guess in those senses, right, it's like, oh, when it gets to that point, because I feel like some people might just be at the thoughts and be like, oh, that's okay, like everyone has those or something like that.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
how do we encourage, not that go to a therapist right now, like, but how
Mm.
do we have those conversations, I guess, or point into that direction sooner than later?
Yeah, of course. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. So there's a great illustration that Dr. Josephine Kim used.
Mm,
Mental health hygiene is as important as dental and oral hygiene. Just like
mm,
we brush our teeth twice a day, every day for 2 minutes, we also need to take care of our mental health every single day. There has to be something that we do, just like physical exercise, eating regularly, eating good food, doing mental health exercises and reflections, things that are good for us, I think is very, very important. And just like you wouldn't want to be next to somebody who hasn't brushed their teeth for a month and then just tries to do it all at once, right? When it's really bad or it's like, they have cavities, it doesn't make sense for us to seek help only when things are really serious.
yeah.
But the unfortunate trend is that it is true that people only seek help when it's actually serious and they feel like they have no sense of control, when they feel like they're harming themselves or others. Research statistics show that it'll take 7 to 12 years. I might be wrong on the exact numbers, but it takes a whole like a decade for people to actually go from, okay, I'm depressed, to seeking help. And that was certainly true for me. Much longer. Like, I think I really recently started seeing a counselor, but
Mm.
even for me as well, right? So even when working in a mental health field or arena, and that's so true for others as well. So I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to not think about mental health as a hard concept, or something difficult, something that you have to do only when you feel like I have to get help or else, or my friend needs to get help or else. I think it's something that we can all do, practice these exercises, create healthy habits, mental health habits that create a healthier us, that can, in the end, for instance, like what we are trying to do is going back to the mustard seed metaphor. Like, what we are trying to do by creating healthy mental health habits is creating really great roots, and really deep roots that go down deeply, so that we can weather bad life's challenges and life
Mm.
circumstances. And on the outside, it may look like we're going through all these external factors that keep hitting us and challenging us, but on the inside, because if we take care of our mental health, if we take care of our well-being, then we are strong and we can still stay resilient. And
Mm.
so I think it's important for everyone to start now, start thinking about, if you are to a point that, for instance, therapy is more for people who have a mental illness or a diagnosable illness, whereas counseling is more for people who, everyday challenges, you have somebody to talk to. You have a
Mm.
counselor, you have a coach, you have a guide to talk to. So even just seeking mental health, and just like we would go to and do 6-month checkups, dental checkups, just doing that regularly also helps for your mental health as well.
That's helpful, even just to break therapist versus counselor too, right? So that it's even feeling like it's a baby step rather than like you have
Yeah.
to go for this point or not. So I
Yeah.
think that's all
Mhm.
helpful terms. And for you, when you wrote, you love to go with a brown leather journal and a black pen. Like I do think like journaling seems to be just such a good outlet, and like
Yes.
just maybe if we have another episode someday, but like what are some tips in journaling that have helped you?
Yeah, so I think journaling is not for everyone. I cannot see my husband, for instance, sitting
Me
down and
neither.
journaling. So don't feel bad. Like, don't think that journaling is the only way to
Right.
take care of your mental health,
Right, right.
and that's like the way. But it's not. It's just one of the many ways. And what I do is I write down what's upsetting me right now. There are a few questions you can ask yourself. How am I feeling, really? What makes me angry? What makes me anxious? What makes me upset? And just listing those down, even when you don't feel like you have to do those, like, just even like sitting down and you think that you're having a good day, and then you write down your anxiety. I'm like, wow, I do have a lot on my mind, right? Like, you
Mm.
realize that you are carrying a lot on your shoulders. And then to ask yourself, okay, what am I going to do about those? Are these things that I can control? No. Okay, things that you can't control, then why worry about it? Things that you can control, okay, then what are you going to do about those?
Mm.
But most of the time, I'm going to be very honest, I do not do that most of the times. What I do is I just literally write down what I'm grateful for. That was second tip, just writing down gratefulness, like being grateful,
Mm.
and just writing down 10 things and forcing myself to write down 10 things. For me, who's always challenged to be more grateful, who's challenged to think a
Mm.
little more positively, especially when my depression is at its low. I think it's super nice because I do come out, going in. It just takes me a couple of minutes to do that. But after that exercise, I feel like I have a better, just positive, more positive attitude. And I do look at it and I'm like, wow, that list was very poorly written. Like, it's like nothing. Like, I'm grateful for my tissue that's next to me while I'm crying. Like, I really can't think of anything. But even that for me is like, wow, okay, I am being grateful. I am living a satisfying life. So I think it's really important for me, like, to have learned that even with depression, I can live a
Mm.
satisfying and happy life. I
Yes.
just have to know how to deal with it. I just have to
Yeah.
know when to address it, and also prep, the people next to me around, just prep them for how to deal with it. But it's really like now, there was a point in time where my middle school students, when I was teaching in the past in Mexico, they were sharing, life's challenges. And I was like, hey, look, I know it's really challenging right now, and that life is hard, but it will get better, and it does get better. Like, I am so glad now, looking back, that I didn't take my life and I didn't end it, only because now I know, after coming through that dark tunnel, life is much more beautiful, that there is hope. There is hope for healing intergenerationally, like between my parents and I, hope for
Mm.
healing for me and my past self, hope for healing with me right now and my future self, right? So there's all these things that I am so grateful for, to be alive now, and that I didn't take that action then.
Mm.
That I really hope that, if you are listening and you feel depressed and down and you've been struggling, that you do not chama, which is like a Korean word for just suffering it
Yeah.
alone. And I don't want you to suffer alone. Like, I want you to live thriving lives, and there is help for that. There is always an outlet. And so, yeah, just seek help. You don't have to suffer silently.
Yes. Oh, what a great way to end all of this. And I still have so many questions, but I think like even as you touched on like intergenerational healing and what that could have looked like, and even your own walk, I have multiple more questions, but we'll hopefully save it for another day. But I just wanted to thank you so much for this time. Did you want to share anything on this part before we ask lame questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, if you were to be a fruit, what would you be and why?
A pineapple.
Oh.
It is only because I love pineapples. There's
Oh.
no other reason. I just love pineapples. And if I had to put a meaning to it, it would be because the outside is so different from the inside. And
Hmm.
one of my pet peeves, I think, is when people box other people into a certain category, because I never fit in any box. And I really disliked it when people did that to me. Oh, you must be
Hmm.
Korean, or you must be this, you must be that. But when you cut a pineapple, it's a bright yellow. So I love that about pineapples. But really, it's only because I like
But
pineapples.
I love your analogy to it. I think that works perfectly. And I think even just thinking back to when you're like, why are you ED? Like it's just so clear, even like the way that you can share that empathy and that experience and not box, when I think it's so easy to box in, right? Like you
Mm,
have that ability to see past that. And
mm.
I just feel like you're in the perfect place that you're meant to be. So
Oh,
I'm
thank
excited to
you.
volunteer again soon.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you some fast questions and you can just share them really quickly.
Okay.
Okay, rapid fire. Favorite book of all time?
Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch
Oh,
Albom.
okay. Proudest accomplishment?
Becoming a mom in a few months.
Yay! Good luck. Ideal baby moon trip if there were no travel restrictions.
Ooh, oh, so we are going to Portugal for a baby moon in few
Ooh.
weeks. So I'm excited for that. That's my ideal.
Have you been there when you were
No,
in
not
Spain?
Portugal. In Spain,
Okay.
no. So
So you
not
never
Portugal.
flew
Yeah.
over. Oh, so
No,
that'll be
no, unfortunately.
exciting.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was like,
So
maybe
that's
you're gonna
exciting.
show your husband the good places, but you guys are gonna
No,
discover it
yeah.
together. Oh, we'll have so much fun. That's
Yeah.
exciting. Biggest fear for motherhood.
Wow. That my child will later in their teenage life say, "I don't want to be like you, and you raised me wrong."
Oh, okay. I'm scared of that too, so I have no encouragement. But hopefully, yes. Hopefully not. Greatest blessing of marriage. Sounds like you guys have a good one.
Ooh, oh man, the companionship.
Mm,
Like, I call my husband, he is my biggest supporter and yet my biggest critic. And
mm,
because he wants me to be so much better, when we were about to get married, he was like, I don't love you for who you are, but for who you'll become, and for your potential. And I was like, wait a
Wait
second,
a
is that
second.
like a compliment, or is that I'm
Mm,
not feeling good right now? But in the end, like, what I realized was, oh, that was a sweet thing to say, because the companionship that I have with him, and the constant support and criticism, and all these things that he shows me, and the unconditional support that he shows me, is really, I never had that growing up moving
mm.
around. so much, and it was always, a lot of goodbyes, whereas he is my first constant in my
Yeah.
life. And so
Yeah.
even my parents, had to move on and go to different places to serve in different fields, whereas, he's been my constant. And so that constant companionship, I think, is the huge and most biggest blessing.
At first it's like, oh wait, like what does that mean when he says that? But it's like, oh, that's so true, because you're going to grow in marriage. Like there's
Hmm.
no choice but to
No.
grow.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so even just like for who you are going to become is very forward
Hmm.
thinking. Wow.
Mm.
Okay. Guilty pleasure food, I guess in general, but since you're pregnant, it could also be
Oh.
a craving. I don't know.
Ooh, I love chocolate. I did love chocolate before pregnancy, not anymore. But that's something that it's my go-to. It's like chocolatey cookies is my guilty pleasure.
Mm.
And when I'm depressed, my counselor asked me, "So when do you know you're depressed? What are the signs?"
Um,
And I said, I know exactly when I'm depressed when I get on my comfy clothes and read all the Harry Potter books in sequence, can't stop, and I'm eating chocolate. Like that's
oh
when I go,
man.
okay,
Okay.
there's something wrong. Like I need to I need help, or I need to reflect, and I this is my depression showing that in a very concrete way. But
That's helpful to know. Like that sounds
yeah.
so like picture perfect. Something like, oh, you're
No,
reading
no.
her, but right, like for
No.
you, like you know what that means. So that's
Yeah, right,
oh, that's
right.
so interesting. And last three words to describe yourself.
Ooh, okay. Passionate. I
Hmm.
can become passionate about anything. If you showed me a documentary about beetles, I am going to become passionate about beetles. I justice is something I love,
Mm.
and always growing up, even when I was little, I would kick people around for like making fun of somebody. Like I would be that. I thought I was like an angel of justice for some reason, and that is still in me, where I get very passionate about social injustice. And
That's very
then
strong for Enneagram 1, which you are.
really,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay,
So it's kind
yes,
of like
there
making
we go.
sense. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then lastly, what would I say? I think creative. I think
Yeah.
I love being creative. I love, even, when you think about nonprofit organizations, you might not think that that's a creative job, but for us, because it's such a niche organization where you don't have a model organization to go after, but you're creating your own path, it needs so much creativity,
Oh,
and
that's
I
such.
love that portion about working at Mustard Seed.
Wow. I'm so happy for this time.
Me too. This is
I
so
feel like
fun.
people will definitely have a lot of questions. So this is already my invitation someday in the future when we're both struggling with our
I'll be
newborns,
looking forward. Yes, I look
which is
forward
not
to
an
it.
ideal time at all.
No.
But yeah, I'll post MSG links and handles and research sense links and all of that, because I feel like these are
Awesome.
resources that will be perfect for
Thank you.
listeners. So
Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Angie.
I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Sharon's journey and follow for more that's to come. Thank you guys for listening to Color Commentary. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. I am so grateful Sharon came on the pod and so vulnerably shared parts of her resilient story to how far she has come today in her own mental health illness. Did you know that 33% of Korean Americans reportedly struggle with depression and mental health problems? However, we are 3 times less likely to see professional help than white Americans due to social stigma, linguistic and cultural barriers, and an overall lack of awareness. This month is so important to realize the resources that are available specifically to us and the ways that we can make steps to breaking intergenerational trauma and releasing freedom forward. Please take time to take care of yourselves, check in on your needs, and leverage tools like @MSGeneration or www.mustardseedgeneration.org, and check out the podcast Research Sense for Korean American Therapy as small bridges to a healthier you. If you love this episode as much as I did, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never have to miss another. Go to @KolarCommentary to comment your key takeaways and join the email list to share what you would like to hear about next. This is Unji Kolar signing off for today. See you next time.